You're fired." Lucien Devereux didn't even look up from the documents covering his desk. The woman standing before him quietly gathered her notebook, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out without another word. She became the 12th female secretary, dismissed in 5 years. The next applicant stepped inside. Several executives exchanged sympathetic glances. Another woman? Lucien finally raised his eyes. Then he frowned. 5 minutes later, he tore his own hiring policy in half. The boardroom fell completely silent. No one had ever seen the city's most feared mafia boss break a rule he had written himself. Lucien Devereux had built his reputation on 2 principles. Never negotiate from emotion. Never repeat a mistake. The second principle was the reason the chair across from his desk remained empty for nearly 10 minutes after the previous applicant left. He skimmed the next resume with little interest. Maren Holloway, 32 years old, nearly a decade of executive administrative experience, outstanding recommendations, no university connections to influential families, no glamorous profile photos attached, no attempts to embellish ordinary achievements, just facts. That alone made the resume unusual. Still, one detail erased any curiosity he might have felt. A female. Lucien placed the folder on the desk. "Send her in." The conference room doors opened quietly. Maren stepped inside, wearing a navy business suit that had clearly been tailored for comfort rather than fashion. Her movements were calm, measured, and completely free of nervous theatrics. She offered a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Devereux." Lucien didn't return the greeting. "Have a seat." She did. Silence lingered for several seconds as he observed her. Most applicants tried to impress him before the interview even began. Expensive watches, designer handbags, confident smiles that felt rehearsed. Maren simply folded her hands in her lap and waited. Lucien finally spoke. "Do you know why you're here? To interview for executive secretary?" "No," he leaned back. "You're here because a staffing agency ignored explicit instructions." She nodded once. "I assumed there had been some misunderstanding. You know I don't hire women. I read the policy. And you still came. The agency scheduled the interview. You could have declined." "I could have. Why didn't you?" Her answer arrived without hesitation. "Because professionalism means honoring commitments, even when the outcome seems unlikely." For the first time, Lucien looked at her a little longer. Interesting, not impressive, just unexpected. He opened her resume again. "Your references describe you as someone with an exceptional memory. They're kind." "I don't care about kindness." "I know, so prove it." He slid a legal pad toward her. "I'll read 30 appointments. Dates, locations, participants, and priorities. One time only. No notes?" No notes. 20 executives, seated along the conference table, exchanged amused glances. Nobody had ever completed this test. Lucien spoke quickly, deliberately changing topics, dates, and locations without any recognizable pattern. International investors, board meetings, private dinners, legal consultations, security briefings. After nearly 8 minutes, he stopped. "Repeat them." Maren took a slow breath. Then she began. Not only did she recall every appointment, she reorganized them into chronological order. She identified 2 scheduling conflicts, suggested an alternative sequence, and quietly pointed out that one meeting would violate European time zone availability for an overseas client. Silence settled across the room. One executive frowned. Another checked the original schedule. She was right. Lucien said nothing. Before he could continue, the conference room doors burst open. A senior director rushed inside, visibly pale. "Mr. Devereux," Lucien's expression hardened. "This meeting is private." "I'm sorry, sir. But we have a serious problem. What happened? The Hawthorne acquisition. Every executive stiffened. Lucian's voice became dangerously calm. What about it? The confidential negotiation files are gone. Someone whispered. Impossible. The director swallowed. The encrypted folder disappeared from the internal server this morning. When is the negotiation? In 42 minutes. And the backup. Corrupted. Another executive spoke quickly. We can't reconstruct everything. We'll have to postpone. We'll lose the acquisition. $500 million. Voices overlapped. People reached for phones. Assistants hurried in and out. Within seconds, the room dissolved into controlled panic. Only one person remained seated. Maren. She watched the chaos quietly. Then she asked a simple question. When was the last scheduling review? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one vice president replied, 3 days ago. She nodded. I attended the preliminary coordination meeting as an observer for another department. Lucian turned toward her. You remember it? I remember everyone. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. The negotiation binder contained 12 primary documents. She began listing them. Purchase agreements, environmental compliance reports, tax summaries, insurance certificates, risk assessments, property evaluations. She continued without pause. Then she named which executive had been responsible for each file, which department finalized it, which legal revision had been approved, and even the order in which the documents had been presented during rehearsal. One executive interrupted. Wait. He opened his laptop. She's correct. Another compared archived emails. She's right again. Within minutes, every missing document had been reconstructed using departmental copies that no one had remembered existed. The negotiation package was restored. The crisis ended almost as quickly as it had begun. The room fell silent. Lucian stared at Maren. She hadn't asked for recognition, hadn't smiled in triumph. She simply straightened the stack of papers in front of her. As far as I can tell, she said gently, the meeting can still begin on time. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Lucian reached into the folder marked Executive Hiring Policy. Without taking his eyes off Maren, he removed the signed document. The page declaring that no woman would ever again serve as his executive secretary. He tore it cleanly down the middle. The sound echoed through the conference room. You start Monday. Every executive froze. No one dared question the decision, because everyone in the room understood one thing. Lucian Devereux had just broken the only rule he had refused to bend for 5 years. 3 weeks after Maren Holloway joined the executive office, an unsettling realization spread through the top floor of Devereux Holdings. The chairman's schedule had become normal. For years, every assistant assigned to Lucian Devereux's office had tried to become indispensable by inserting themselves into every conversation. Some lingered after meetings hoping to earn personal favor. Others exaggerated minor accomplishments, believing praise was the quickest path to promotion. Maren did none of those things. She arrived every morning precisely 20 minutes before everyone else. She reviewed the day's agenda, verified every meeting room, confirmed every security clearance, checked every travel itinerary twice. By the time Lucian stepped off the private elevator, his day had already begun moving with quiet precision. He noticed it. He simply refused to admit it. One Monday morning, Lucian entered his office without acknowledging anyone. Maren looked up from her tablet. Good morning, Mr. Devereux. A slight nod was the only response. She wasn't offended. She had worked with enough demanding executives to understand that courtesy and warmth were not the same thing. At exactly 11:58, she knocked once before entering his office. You have 12 minutes before your conference call with Zurich. I know. You also skipped breakfast. I'm working. You've been working since 6. He continued signing documents. Without another word, Marin placed a neatly wrapped sandwich and a cup of black coffee beside his laptop. I didn't order lunch. No. Then why is it here? Because low blood sugar makes you noticeably less patient during negotiations. Lucien finally looked up. Is that a medical diagnosis? No. A psychological observation. For several seconds he stared at her, then returned to his paperwork. I'll eat later. You won't. I will. You have 7 consecutive meetings after Zurich. Silence. She turned toward the door. The coffee will still be warm for another 10 minutes. When she left, Lucien frowned at the untouched sandwich. 5 minutes later, it disappeared. The following afternoon, another small confrontation unfolded. Lucien emerged from a strategy meeting, already discussing the next acquisition with 3 senior executives. They continued walking toward the elevator. Marin intercepted them without hesitation. You have a dentist appointment. Lucien kept walking. Cancel it. I already rescheduled it twice. It isn't urgent. The dentist disagrees. One executive nearly laughed. No one interrupted the chairman over a dental appointment. Marin did. She calmly handed Lucien a folder. The next available opening is in 3 months. I'm busy. So are root canals. The hallway fell silent. Lucien slowly looked at her. She met his gaze without the slightest hint of fear. Finally, he sighed. Fine. The executives watched their chairman change direction toward the private exit. One whispered, Did she just win? Another answered, I think she planned the entire conversation. Incidents like that became surprisingly common. She reminded him to drink water before long presentations. Quietly removed duplicate meetings that assistants from other departments accidentally scheduled. Corrected travel plans before anyone noticed booking errors. Returned unsigned contracts to his desk before legal deadlines expired. She never announced these accomplishments. Often, Lucien discovered them only because a crisis never happened. The office itself began changing. Phones rang less often. Employees stopped running through hallways in panic. Board meetings started exactly on time. Even Elias Ward, the stern chief of security, noticed the difference. One afternoon he entered Lucien's office, carrying a security report. He glanced toward Marin's desk. She reorganized visitor screening. Lucien continued reading. I noticed. Security breaches are down 40%. I noticed. Elias hesitated. You trust her? Lucien answered without looking up. I trust her work. The distinction mattered. At least to him. Several days later, another unexpected moment unfolded. Lucien was preparing for an important video conference with investors in Singapore when Marin quietly entered. Your tie. He barely glanced at her. What about it? It's inside out. He looked down. She was right. Without embarrassment or amusement, she handed him another tie already matched to his suit. You keep spare ties? You keep forgetting them. He accepted it. How long has this been happening? Since your 2nd week. And you never mentioned it. I assumed you'd eventually ask. He almost smiled. Almost. Later that evening, after the office had emptied, Lucien remained alone, reviewing quarterly reports. The silence felt different. Not empty. Organized. Predictable. Peaceful. He looked through the glass wall toward the reception area. Marin was still there. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't waiting for him to notice her dedication. She was simply making sure tomorrow would run as smoothly as today. For reasons he couldn't explain, his office no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt reliable. The realization unsettled him more than any corporate threat, because for the first time in years, Lucien Devereux found himself depending on someone. and the person he depended on was the very kind of employee he had once sworn never to hire. By the second month, people stopped asking how long Maren Holloway would last. Instead, they began wondering why she had lasted at all. Every assistant before her had followed the same predictable pattern. At first, they admired Lucien Devereux's power. Then they tried to earn his favor. Eventually, one of two things happened. They either sought influence through personal attention or discovered that confidential information carried a very high price outside the company. Lucien had witnessed both too many times. He no longer believed they were exceptions. He believed they were proof. One rainy evening, after the board had gone home, Elias Ward entered the chairman's office carrying the weekly security report. He placed a sealed folder on Lucien's desk. "We completed another background review on Maren." Lucien looked up. "You've checked her 3 times. I've checked everyone 3 times. And no hidden debts. No unexplained income. No contact with competitors. No unusual communication patterns." Lucien remained silent. Elias hesitated before speaking again. "She's clean." Lucien closed the report without opening it. "No one's that clean. Maybe she is." Lucien gave a quiet, humorless smile. "You weren't here 6 years ago." Elias knew what that meant. The subject rarely surfaced. When it did, everyone listened. Lucien walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath the evening rain. This company almost disappeared. His voice was calm, almost detached. "Our largest expansion project was destroyed before we signed a single contract." Elias remembered the case. Every negotiation strategy, every acquisition target, every financial projection. Someone inside the executive office had leaked everything. Competitors arrived first. Banks withdrew support. Partners disappeared overnight. Billions vanished within weeks. The secretary? Lucien nodded once. She sold information. And after her, the next one leaked meeting schedules. The third accepted gifts from suppliers. The fourth, he stopped. The list had become too long, too familiar. Eventually, he said quietly, "I stopped looking for individual reasons. You blamed the pattern. I eliminated the possibility." Elias understood. For Lucien, banning female executive secretaries had never been about anger. It had become risk management. Or so he believed. Neither man noticed Maren approaching from the hallway until she gently knocked on the open door. "I brought tomorrow's board briefing." Lucien accepted the folder. "Leave it." She did, without lingering, without asking what they had been discussing. After she disappeared, Elias watched the closed door for several seconds. She didn't even seem curious. Lucien answered almost automatically. "That's what concerns me." The next morning presented another quiet test. An investment bank accidentally emailed confidential valuation data to the executive office before it had been encrypted. The mistake could have created a regulatory nightmare. Maren noticed it first. She immediately contacted legal compliance. Requested deletion confirmation. Verified every recipient. Documented the incident. Then informed Lucien only after the problem had already been contained. He studied the report carefully. "You could have read every page." "I could have. You didn't. It wasn't addressed to me. Most people would have looked. Curiosity isn't part of my job description." Lucien searched her expression for signs of performance. There were none. She wasn't trying to impress him. She genuinely believed the answer required no praise. Days later, another opportunity arrived. One of the company's suppliers delivered an expensive designer handbag addressed to Maren. There was no card, only a handwritten note, a small thank you for making meetings easier. She carried the unopened box directly into Lucian's office. "This belongs in compliance." He looked at the package. "You don't want to know what's inside?" "No. It could be valuable." "That's precisely why I shouldn't open it." Lucian pressed a button on his desk phone. "Security." Within moments, Elias entered. Marin handed him the sealed package. "Please log this as an attempted gift." Elias accepted it. When the door closed again, Lucian asked the question that had lingered in his mind for weeks. "Why?" She tilted her head slightly. "Why what? Why refuse something no one would ever know about?" Her answer came softly. "Because I would know." The room became unexpectedly quiet. No dramatic speech, no moral lecture, just 6 simple words. "Because I would know." For reasons Lucian couldn't fully explain, those words followed him throughout the day. He heard them during board meetings, while reviewing contracts, even during his evening drive home. Years of suspicion had taught him to believe trust was temporary. Marin behaved as though integrity existed, even when no one was watching. That idea felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Several days later, Lucian caught himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He left his office without locking the confidential cabinet behind his desk. Halfway down the hallway, he stopped. His hand instinctively reached for the office key. Then he looked back through the glass wall. Marin sat quietly organizing tomorrow's agenda. She never glanced toward the cabinet, never looked around the office, never took advantage of being alone. Lucian slowly lowered his hand. It was a tiny decision, almost meaningless. Yet for a man who had built his life on absolute control, it represented something far greater. For the first time since betrayal had nearly destroyed everything he had built, Lucian Devereux allowed trust to exist before proof demanded it. And although he refused to admit it aloud, the rule he had believed protected him was beginning to look less like wisdom and more like fear. By the beginning of the 3rd month, Marin Holloway had unknowingly become the most discussed employee inside Devereux Holdings, not because she sought attention, because she never did. Executives who had once questioned Lucian's decision now found themselves relying on schedules Marin had coordinated. Meetings started on time. Overseas clients praised the company's efficiency. Even minor departments noticed that communication flowed more smoothly whenever the executive office became involved. The improvements were impossible to deny, so people searched for another explanation. "It isn't her. It's him. She's receiving special treatment." Rumors traveled faster than facts. The whispers began in break rooms before spreading through every floor of the headquarters. Some claimed Lucian felt sorry for her because she lacked conventional beauty. Others insisted he admired her loyalty simply because she never challenged him. Or the cruelest rumor suggested she had earned his trust only because no one could possibly see her as a romantic distraction. Marin heard nearly all of them. She answered none. Years of workplace discrimination had taught her a painful lesson. People often judged appearances long before they judged character. Arguing rarely changed their minds. Doing excellent work sometimes did. One afternoon, she entered the employee lounge to refill her coffee. The room quieted instantly. 3 marketing associates who had been laughing moments earlier suddenly became fascinated by their phones. A finance manager offered an awkward smile before leaving, without speaking. Marin calmly poured her coffee. As she reached the door, she heard someone whisper behind her, "I guess being ordinary has advantages." Another voice replied, "Maybe that's exactly why the boss trusts her." Soft laughter followed. She paused for only a heartbeat, then continued walking without looking back. Later that day, Elias Ward happened to review security footage from the executive floor. He noticed the exchange. When he mentioned it to Lucian, the chairman's expression hardened. Did she react? No. Did she report it? No. Lucian frowned. Why not? Elias answered quietly. Maybe she's used to it. Those 4 words lingered in Lucian's thoughts, far longer than he expected. Used to it. He found the idea strangely unsettling. A few days later, the situation became worse. Someone anonymously uploaded edited photographs to the company's internal social platform. One image widened Marin's figure until it became almost cartoonish. Another replaced her professional portrait with a drawing of an overfilled office chair. The caption beneath it read, "Executive support, executive size." Within minutes, employees began reacting. Some laughed. Some ignored it. Very few defended her. Human resources removed the posts within the hour. The damage had already spread. When Marin arrived the following morning, she noticed conversations ending as she approached. Several employees avoided eye contact. She understood immediately. Without opening the website, without asking questions, she simply continued organizing Lucian's schedule exactly as she had every other morning. At 10 o'clock, Lucian entered the office. One glance at her was enough. She smiled politely. But something about the smile was different, smaller, more carefully constructed. "You slept poorly." She looked up in surprise. "I'm fine. You rubbed your left wrist 3 times during our briefing." She blinked. "You only do that when something is bothering you." For the first time since they had met, Marin looked away. "It isn't important." Lucian did not press further. Instead, after she left his office, he called Elias. "Find out." It took less than 15 minutes. Elias placed printed screenshots on Lucian's desk. The room became silent. Lucian studied every edited photograph, every anonymous comment, every laughing emoji. His expression never changed, which, Elias knew, was far more dangerous than visible anger. Who started it? We're tracing the original account. How many employees shared it? At least 23. Lucian slowly closed the folder. Every one of them attends tomorrow's leadership meeting. Elias raised an eyebrow. "You intend to confront them?" "No." Lucian stood and walked toward the glass wall, overlooking the executive floor. Employees moved from office to office, unaware they were being watched. "I intend to remind them what leadership means." That afternoon, something unusual happened. Marin finished preparing the agenda for the next day's board session and discovered a handwritten note resting beneath her keyboard. She unfolded it carefully. There were only 6 words. "Don't listen to people who envy integrity." No signature, no explanation. She looked around the nearly empty office. No one met her eyes. Quietly, she folded the paper and placed it inside her notebook. Across the hallway, behind the tinted glass of his office, Lucian noticed the faintest change in her expression. Not happiness, not relief. Just enough hope to make her shoulders relax. He said nothing. Because protecting someone was not always about dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it began by making certain they never had to face cruelty completely alone. Outside the executive floor, however, another pair of eyes watched everything. Serena Ashcroft, elegant, ambitious, Vice President of Corporate Relations. She had expected to become Lucian Devereaux's closest advisor the moment female secretaries disappeared from his office. Instead, every week Marin earned more trust, more influence, more quiet respect. Serena clenched the folder in her hands. If whispers had failed, she would find a far more public way to remind everyone exactly where Marin Holloway belonged. The annual Devereaux Foundation charity banquet was the most anticipated corporate event of the year. Business leaders, government officials, philanthropists, international investors, nearly every influential figure in the city gathered beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Ashbourne Hotel. For one evening, billion-dollar negotiations gave way to polished smiles and carefully rehearsed conversations. Every executive from Devereux Holdings had received an invitation, including Maren Holloway. She almost declined. She owned only one formal gown, a deep emerald dress she had purchased years earlier after saving for months. It fit her beautifully, though she knew it would never resemble the designer gowns worn by women who regularly attended events like this. Still, professionalism required her presence. She arrived quietly, greeting colleagues with her usual warmth before moving toward the edge of the ballroom, exactly where she felt most comfortable. Across the room, Serena Ashcroft noticed her immediately. An elegant smile appeared on her face. It never reached her eyes. Several executives approached Serena. "You look wonderful." As always, she accepted every compliment effortlessly. Then her gaze drifted back toward Maren, standing alone, speaking politely with one of the junior accountants, laughing softly at something he had said. Serena's smile faded. She couldn't understand it. Why did people keep choosing Maren's company? Why did Lucien trust her? Why did every accomplishment seem to draw respect without demanding attention? Jealousy had long since become resentment. Tonight, Serena decided, would settle everything. Meanwhile, Lucien stood near the stage, discussing a charitable education initiative with several donors. His attention appeared fixed on the conversation. In reality, he always knew where Maren was. Not because he distrusted her, because protecting valuable people had become instinct. Elias noticed it too. "You've looked across the ballroom 6 times. Lucien calmly sipped his water. "Have I?" 7. Lucien chose not to answer. Across the ballroom, servers began circulating with trays of wine. Serena accepted a glass of red Bordeaux. Then another. She waited, watching, calculating. When Maren stepped away from the accountant and started toward the refreshment table, Serena moved. The collision looked accidental. A slight turn. One carefully timed step. Then, red wine cascaded across the front of Maren's emerald gown. The deep crimson stain spread instantly across the fabric. The conversation around them stopped. Every nearby guest turned to look. "Oh dear," Serena said, though her voice carried no regret. "How terribly unfortunate." Maren instinctively stepped back. "I'm sorry." She reached for a napkin. Before she could wipe away the stain, Serena spoke again, loudly enough for dozens of people nearby to hear. Perhaps executive assistants should remember where they belong. Silence. Then, a few uncomfortable chuckles. Someone looked away. Others pretended not to notice. The humiliation settled over the ballroom more heavily than the spilled wine. Maren lowered her eyes. Not because she believed the words, because she refused to create a scene. "I'm sorry if I caused inconvenience," she said quietly. The apology surprised everyone. She had done nothing wrong. Yet years of enduring ridicule had taught her that apologizing often ended cruelty faster than defending herself. Serena smiled with quiet satisfaction, exactly as expected. Across the ballroom, Lucien heard every word. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. The donor speaking to him noticed his expression change. "What is it?" Lucien never answered. He began walking. Not quickly, not dramatically. Simply with the calm, measured pace that made even hardened criminals nervous. One by one, conversations died as people realized where he was going. Serena finally noticed him approaching. Her confidence wavered. Lucien stopped beside Maren. He looked first at the stain covering her gown, then at the napkin trembling slightly in her hand. Finally, he looked at Serena. No anger showed on his face. That frightened her far more than shouting would have. Without saying a word, Lucien removed his tailored black dinner jacket. The ballroom watched in complete silence. He gently placed it over Maren's shoulders. The fabric concealed nearly every trace of the wine. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm enough to freeze the room. Anyone who humiliates the woman responsible for keeping this company standing. He paused. Every eye remained fixed on him. Is humiliating me. The words echoed through the ballroom. No one moved. No one breathed. Serena's confident smile vanished. Mr. Devereux, you only what? His tone never rose. You only embarrassed an employee. You only mocked someone because of her appearance. You only assumed kindness was weakness. Each question landed harder than the last. Serena struggled to answer. I didn't intend. Intent does not erase character. The sentence ended every excuse before it began. Lucien turned slightly toward the guests surrounding them. His voice carried across the ballroom. This company measures people by integrity, not appearance, not popularity, and certainly not by the cruelty they can disguise as humor. Several executives lowered their heads. Some of the very employees who had laughed at anonymous photographs earlier that week now found themselves unable to meet his eyes. Lucien then did something no one had ever witnessed. He offered Marin his arm. Would you walk with me? She looked at him in stunned silence. I don't want to interrupt the evening. You won't. He gave the smallest hint of a smile. You already improved it. Slowly, uncertainly, she placed her hand on his arm. Together, they crossed the ballroom. No one laughed. No one whispered. The same crowd that had watched one woman be humiliated now stepped aside with quiet respect. Elias observed everything from across the room. He had spent years protecting Lucien from physical threats. Tonight, he realized something different. The city's most feared mafia boss had just revealed his greatest vulnerability. Someone had hurt Marin, and for the first time in years, Lucien Devereux had chosen compassion over distance. Not in private, but before the entire city. The moment would be remembered long after the charity gala ended, because everyone present understood one undeniable truth. From that night forward, no one at Devereux Holdings would ever dare mistake Marin Holloway's place again. The morning after the charity banquet, Devereux Holdings felt unusually quiet. Not because employees had nothing to discuss, because everyone was discussing the same thing. Videos from the banquet had circulated among senior executives before sunrise. Although the event had been private, dozens of guests had recorded the moment Lucien Devereux placed his jacket over Marin's shoulders. More importantly, everyone had heard what he said. Anyone who humiliates the woman responsible for keeping this company standing is humiliating me. By 8 o'clock, the executive floor was almost silent. Conversations stopped whenever Marin walked past. Some employees smiled awkwardly. Others lowered their heads in embarrassment. The same people who had ignored anonymous insults only days earlier now seemed uncertain how to face her. Marin greeted everyone, exactly as she always had. Nothing more, nothing less. She had no desire to make anyone feel ashamed. She simply wanted another ordinary workday. Inside the chairman's office, however, Lucien sat staring at the city skyline instead of the reports covering his desk. For the first time in years, business wasn't occupying his thoughts. His own decisions were. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. Elias entered. You've received 3 calls from board members. I know. They're asking whether last night was intentional. Lucien finally looked away from the window. It was. They're worried. About what? That people may think emotion now influences your leadership. Lucien remained quiet for several moments. Then he surprised even himself. Perhaps it should. Elias blinked. That was not the man he had served for nearly a decade. Lucien noticed his reaction. I spent years believing distance created better judgment. And now, I've begun wondering whether distance simply made me blind. Later that afternoon, Lucian requested an executive leadership meeting. Every vice president attended. Department directors filled the remaining seats. Even Serena Ashcroft arrived, though the confidence she once carried had noticeably faded. Marin expected to take notes as usual. Instead, Lucian addressed the room before anyone sat down. There will be one item on today's agenda. No presentation appeared on the screen. No financial reports. Only silence. Lucian rested both hands on the conference table. For 5 years, I enforced a policy that prohibited women from serving as my executive secretary. Everyone listened without moving. I justified that decision as risk management. His voice remained calm, but it wasn't. He paused. It was fear. The room seemed to hold its breath. Lucian had never admitted weakness. Not publicly, not privately, not to anyone. I allowed the betrayal of several individuals to define an entire group of people. His eyes slowly moved around the table. I convinced myself trust no longer existed. No one interrupted. Then, Lucian looked directly at Marin. She seemed almost uncomfortable being the center of attention. You did not challenge my opinions with speeches. You never argued. You never asked me to reconsider my policy. His expression softened in a way few people had ever witnessed. You simply arrived every morning and gave me another reason to question my certainty. Marin lowered her eyes. Lucian continued. I believed competence and integrity were unrelated. You proved they belong together. Another long silence settled over the room. Then Lucian spoke the words no one expected to hear. I've heard people say you changed my rule. He slowly shook his head. No, you changed the man who wrote it. Several executives exchanged stunned glances. Serena stared at the conference table, unable to hide her disbelief. The chairman she had spent years trying to impress was thanking another employee. Not for ambition, not for influence, for character. Lucian turned toward the assembled leadership team. Effective immediately. The hiring policy banning female executive secretaries is permanently revoked. A quiet murmur spread through the room. He continued before anyone could respond. Future promotions will be determined by ability, nothing else. Then, for perhaps the first time since founding Devereaux Holdings, Lucian did something completely unexpected. He applauded. One deliberate clap. Then another. Every eye shifted toward Marin. She looked genuinely startled. I don't think this is necessary, she said softly. It is, Lucian replied. You've thanked this company every day through your work. It's time the company thanked you. Elias was the first to join the applause, then several directors, then the entire executive team. The sound echoed through the conference room. Marin stood motionless, overwhelmed by a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. Recognition. Not because someone pitied her, not because someone wanted something from her, because her work mattered. When the applause finally faded, Lucian spoke one last time. There is another change. He looked toward human resources. I want mandatory leadership training on professional respect, workplace dignity, and appearance-based discrimination. Several executives nodded immediately. No one objected, because after everything that had happened, there was nothing left to argue. As the meeting concluded, employees quietly began leaving the room. Marin gathered her notebook as always. Before she reached the door, Lucian spoke. Marin. She turned. Yes, Mr. Devereaux. He hesitated for only a second. It felt strangely unfamiliar. Then he said the simplest words in the English language, words he almost never offered anyone. Thank you. The room fell silent once more. Marin smiled. Not the careful professional smile she wore for clients. Not the polite smile she used to ease awkward conversations. This one reached her eyes. It has been an honor, she answered quietly. For the first time in many years. Lucien Devereux discovered that gratitude required far more courage than authority ever had. And in that quiet exchange, the final wall around his heart finally began to fall. 4 months passed after the charity banquet. Spring quietly gave way to early summer, and Devereux Holdings no longer resembled the company Maren Holloway had first entered. The atmosphere had changed. Managers who once overlooked junior employees now listened more carefully. Recruitment panels evaluated applicants without requiring photographs during the first screening stage. Leadership workshops on workplace respect had become mandatory. No one claimed the culture had become perfect, but it had become better. And almost everyone knew why. Ironically, the one person who never recognized her own influence was Maren herself. She continued arriving before sunrise. She still left, after making certain the next day's schedule was flawless. She still believed she was simply doing the job she had been hired to do. One Monday morning, Human Resources requested a confidential meeting. The conversation lasted less than 30 minutes. When Maren returned to her desk, she carried a sealed envelope in her hands. She stared at it for several moments before slipping it into her bag. Across the hallway, Lucien noticed. He said nothing. That evening, long after the executive floor had emptied, Maren knocked softly on his office door. "You wanted tomorrow's briefing?" She nodded. "And?" She hesitated. "I also wanted to thank you." Lucien looked up from his desk. "For what?" "For everything." Something in her voice made him set his pen down. She placed another envelope on his desk. "I won't be needing this anymore." Lucien frowned. "What is it?" "My resignation." The room became impossibly still. He looked from the envelope to Maren, then back again. Finally, he opened it. The letter was brief, professional, grateful, exactly the kind of resignation she would write. His eyes stopped on the final sentence. "I believe the company has grown beyond needing what I can offer." He slowly lowered the page. "Explain." Maren folded her hands in front of her. "This morning, Human Resources offered me the position of Chief of Staff. A promotion. Yes, you earned it." She smiled sadly. "I declined." Lucien's eyebrows lifted. "You declined? I think someone stronger should accept it." He stared at her as though she had spoken another language. "Why would you think that?" She looked toward the city lights beyond the windows. "When I came here, I expected to organize calendars. I never expected to become part of changing the company. You've accomplished that now. The systems work. The executives trust each other more. You no longer need someone constantly reminding you to eat lunch." A faint smile touched Lucien's face despite himself. "You still remind me. Old habits." Her smile faded. "You deserve someone more ambitious. Someone who can take the company even further. I've done everything I came here to do." She took a slow breath. "So it's time for me to leave." Lucien looked at the resignation letter again. For years, people had entered his office asking for promotions, raises, influence, recognition. This was the first time someone had voluntarily walked away after earning all of them. He stood. Not abruptly, quietly, as though he needed the movement to organize thoughts he had spent months refusing to acknowledge. He walked toward the window. The city stretched beneath them, alive with lights. "I used to think," he said at last, "that the strongest person in a company was the one giving orders." Maren remained silent. "I was wrong." He turned to face her. "The strongest person in this building has always been the woman everyone underestimated." She lowered her eyes. "Mr. Devereux." "No." His voice was gentle. "Let me finish." He stepped closer, not as a chairman addressing an employee. As a man speaking to the person who had quietly transformed his life. "I stopped needing a secretary months ago." Maren looked up, confusion crossing her face. He nodded. The calendars could be managed. The meetings could be delegated. The reports could be organized. Someone else could eventually learn every system you've built. He paused. But there is one thing no one else can replace. Silence settled between them. For perhaps the first time in his life, Lucien Devereux looked genuinely uncertain. I've spent years believing trust was impossible. You gave it back to me. I believed respect had to be demanded. You taught me it could be earned. I believed distance made leaders stronger. You proved kindness requires far greater strength. His voice became almost quiet enough to disappear. What I cannot imagine losing is you. Maren felt tears gathering before she realized she was crying. She quickly looked away. I never wanted to make your life more complicated. You didn't. You made it meaningful. The words hung in the silence. No rehearsed declarations. No dramatic promises. Only truth. Lucien took one final step forward. Maren Holloway, I am not asking you to stay because you're the best secretary I've ever had. I'm asking you to stay because somewhere between board meetings, forgotten lunches, impossible schedules, and ordinary mornings, I fell in love with the woman who never once tried to make me notice her. A tear slipped down Maren's cheek. She laughed softly through it. You really would forget lunch without me. For the first time in years, Lucien laughed. A genuine, unguarded laugh. I absolutely would. She closed the distance between them. Not with urgency, not with hesitation. Simply with quiet certainty. Then she reached for his hand. You'll have to accept one condition. His expression softened. Name it. You still don't skip lunch. He smiled. I can agree to that. Outside the office windows, the city continued its restless rhythm. Inside, two people who had spent years believing they were meant to stand alone finally realized that the strongest partnerships were never built on power. They were built on trust. 1 year later, the headquarters of Devereux Holdings looked different, not because the building had changed, because the people inside it had. The company had launched a new leadership scholarship for women pursuing careers in executive management. The program provided mentorship, professional training, and full financial support for employees who had previously believed leadership positions were beyond their reach. Applications had arrived from across the country. Some candidates mentioned the company's reputation. Others spoke about its culture. Many simply said they finally believed they would be judged by their ability instead of their appearance. On the morning of the inaugural award ceremony, the auditorium was filled with employees, business leaders, university representatives, and journalists. At the center of the stage stood two people, Lucien Devereux and Maren Holloway. No longer merely chairman and executive secretary, they had become partners in every sense of the word. Maren now served as chief of staff, guiding the executive office with the same quiet excellence that had transformed it from the beginning. She never sought attention, yet many of the young scholarship recipients looked at her with unmistakable admiration. They saw proof that integrity could overcome prejudice. As the ceremony concluded, reporters gathered near the stage. One journalist raised a hand. Mr. Devereux, after everything your company has accomplished over the past year, he smiled politely. What has been the most important business decision of your career? The room fell silent. Many expected him to mention an acquisition, an international expansion, a billion-dollar investment. Instead, Lucien looked toward Maren. His expression softened with the quiet certainty everyone in the company had come to recognize. The most important decision I ever made, he paused, was hiring the one candidate everyone told me to reject. Cameras flashed across the auditorium. Several scholarship recipients smiled through tears. Maren laughed softly and shook her head. You've become much better at public speaking. Lucien smiled. I had an excellent teacher. The audience laughed with them, then rose together in a standing ovation. The applause was not for a billionaire chairman, nor for the feared man whose private life remained wrapped in mystery. It was for a company that had learned to replace assumptions with fairness, fear with trust, and appearances with character. As the applause continued, Lucien quietly reached for Merrin's hand. She squeezed it gently. Neither of them needed another speech. Their story had never been about dramatic promises or impossible miracles. It had been about small, consistent acts of integrity that slowly changed 2 lives, then an entire company. And in the years that followed, whenever new employees asked why Devereux Holdings had become one of the most respected workplaces in the country, the answer was always the same. Sometimes, the strongest leader isn't the one who never changes. It's the one courageous enough to admit that the right person can change everything.